Hey guys, so today we're going to take a look at rotations. So first of all, let's do a quick review. A rotation is a turn. And also, let's review our quadrants. So let's draw a coordinate plane. If you'll remember, we have quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when we talk about rotations, we're talking about turning. So we may turn, let's say I have a point here, we may make one turn to the left, one turn to the right. So that is actually what we're talking about, is turning points in that coordinate plane. So before we go into too much detail, I want to review or show you the rules. Rules are going to be really important for rotations. So let's look at our first type of turn. So if we turn, it's called 90 degrees clockwise. The reason we use clockwise is, remember the old school clocks? Well, those old school clocks, if they're working right, they go to the right. So a 90 degrees clockwise rotation is one turn. Each of these turns on the quadrants, or each of these quadrants, is 90 degrees. So 90 degrees clockwise is one turn to the right. So that means if I start here, I turn one quadrant to the right and I move here. Let's say that my point starts here. If I turn one quadrant to the right, I'll go from quadrant 2 to quadrant 1. So that's what I'm talking about when I say one turn to the right. And the rule for that is you take the original point, and 90 degrees clockwise is y comma negative x. That means we swap the x and y and we change the sign of the second number. So that's the first kind of turn or rotation. The second kind is a 90 degrees counterclockwise. So 90 degrees counterclockwise. And counterclockwise is to the left because that's the opposite way. Counter means opposite way that a clock goes. So 90 degrees is one turn to the left. So let's say that my point starts here in quadrant 3. One point to the left would move it to quadrant 2. So that would be a 90 degrees clockwise turn. Let's say we start in quadrant 4. Go the opposite way that a clock does, so you'll move to quadrant 1. So going to the left is like your quadrants are counting backwards. Or, well, I don't want to say that. Don't hold on to that. Let's say we start in quadrant 2, we go left 1. That's a 90 degrees counterclockwise turn. So the rule for that is 90 degrees counterclockwise, negative y comma x. That means we flip the x and the y and we change the sign of the first number. Now let's look at the last kind of rotation we'll look at in this lesson. A 180 degree rotation or turn. Well guys, think about it, 90 and 90 is 180. That's two turns. And that's going to be in either direction because you're going to end up in the same exact place. Let me go ahead and give you that rule and then I'll show you what that looks like. So you take the original point and the rule is negative x, comma, negative y. That just means you change the signs of both numbers. So let's say my point started in quadrant 2. If I go 2 turns, I'll go 1, 2 turns, and I would end up in quadrant 1. Watch this. Here's why direction doesn't matter. Let's take the same point and go left 2. Well, guess what? We end up in quadrant 1. So a 180 degree turn is nothing more than 2 turns. So use your rules. We're going to depend on these rules heavily in this lesson. In your assignment today, these are the types of problems you'll encounter. So let's take a look at the first one. Let's label this example 1. So we're going to do a rotation 180 degrees about the origin. That just means 2 turns. And we're going to focus on point J. So to turn 2 times, remember it doesn't matter which direction, 1, 2, or 1, 2, we're going to end up somewhere in this quadrant. See that? If I go 1, 2 jumps to the left or 1, 2 jumps to the right. So I know I'm going to end up somewhere in here. I've got to get that in my mind. So now I read the point. So J is at 1, -1. And I get my rule. So the rule for a 180-degree turn says change both of the signs. So to go from J to J prime, I change both of the signs. Let me write that rule. Change both of the signs. So what's the opposite of +1? -1. What's the opposite of -1? +1. Well, let's test it and see if it goes where we said. So -1 means go left 1 and up 1. Yep, there it is. That's 2 turns. So I know I got that right. So now let's look at example 2. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this is what I want you to do on your lesson, it says to rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise about the origin, point M. So we're focused on point M. But that 90 degrees counterclockwise, I'm going to go get that rule. And 90 degrees counterclockwise is this right here. Swap the X and Y and change the sign of the first number. So I've got to read my point first. So M is at 1, 2, 3, -1. And I want to think about what makes sense. 90 degrees counterclockwise, and again, I keep referring back to my notes, that's 1 turn to the left. So 1 turn to the left would mean that I go to this quadrant. That's 1 turn. Counterclockwise means to the left, like the opposite of the way a clock goes. Now let's follow the rule. So the rule says swap the X and the Y and change the sign of the first number. So that becomes a +1, 3. Well, let's graph that and see if we were right. +1 to the right 1, up 3. 1, 2, 3. Yup. So I have gone to the correct place. Let's try a couple more. So look at number 3. Oh, so here they just give us all the points. That means you don't have to read it first. You just find your rule and you do it. So this says to rotate 90 degrees clockwise. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to find my rule. 90 degrees clockwise says Y, -x. Y, -x. So that means I swap the X and the Y. So in your notes, what I want you to write is I want you to write rotation 90 degrees clockwise, write the rule, copy these original points. And now you're going to write, you can pause the video to do that, but now you're going to write your rotated points. So S prime, it says flip the X and Y, so I'm going to do that first, and then change the sign of the second number. So 1 becomes -1. Let's do it again. W prime. So the rule says swap the X and the Y and change the sign of the negative number of the second number. So +1 becomes -1. One more time. J prime. So I'm going to flip my X and my Y And the rule says change the sign of the second number. So positive 3 becomes negative 3. Now let's take a look at example 4. So in your notes, I want you to write rotation 180 degrees. I want you to copy these points down. And then let's find our rule and write that down. So a rotation 180 degrees. I always look back at my rules. That's the first thing that we wrote. So 180 degrees says negative x, negative y. So let me write the rule. That's what you write in your notes. Negative x, negative y. And now it only asks for x prime. So that's the only one that I have to write the new coordinates for. So I'm going to find x. The rule says just to change the sign of both numbers. So 1 becomes negative 1, and negative 5 becomes positive 5. Now let's take a look at the last couple of examples. Just like all of our other lessons, I give you both pictures and we want to find, and by the way, change those words reflection to rotation because we're talking about rotations. Okay, so let's take a look. We find our starting point. Here's how we come up with the rule on rotations. Pick any one point. I like U. And then U prime. So it looks to me, I'm turning 2 turns. And it really doesn't matter which direction because watch this. 2 turns. So which one of my rules talks about 2 turns? And it doesn't matter the direction. Well, let's go back. So 90 degrees clockwise is 1 turn. 90 degrees counterclockwise is 1 turn. 180 degrees is 2 turns. And so I'm going to write the rule. So, writing it using words, I have 2 turns. And my rule is negative x, negative y. You don't have to worry about putting numbers in there. You just use the same rules that we talked about in the beginning of the lesson. And now let's look at number 6. In your notes, you can sketch the problems or the graphs, but the most important thing is that you put that it's 2 turns and then the rule. So now let's look at 6. I'm going to pick, let's say t and t prime. So to get from t to t prime, I turn 1. I go from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, and it's 1 turn to the left. So 1 turn to the left. Okay? So if you go from 1 to 2, that's 1 turn to the left. So let's see, 1 turn to the left, that is a 90 degrees clockwise turn. You can also put that in words, 90 degrees, counterclockwise. And so we want to write that rule. And the rule says negative y, comma, x. Let me get down there. So my algebraic rule is negative y, comma, x. That means swap the x and y and change the sign of the first number. So take your time, use your notes to help you with your practice and also on your quiz. I will talk to you guys later.